Hey everybody, real quick announcement. If you live in the London area, on August 13th, 2011, we're going to do a photography meetup for the podcast. Now, I unfortunately will not be able to make this one. I won't be in the UK that soon. But my friend Paula is organizing it. She lives in London, and I have done meetups with this group of people before, and they're a lot of fun. So remember, if you live in London or anywhere in the UK and you can make it down, I definitely recommend you do so. It's a great group of people, and it should be a lot of fun.
Join us now on Flickr at flickr.com/groups/art of photography.
Everybody, welcome back once again to another episode of The Art of Photography. I am your host, Ted Forbes. Last time we talked about just basic information on how you get a sharper image, controlling depth of field, and I use this awesome large format lens to show you, just simply because you can see through it. And what I want to do is take that a step further today. Last episode was kind of targeted towards more beginners. Once you get a handle on that, I think it's really important to understand, if you need more in the image to be sharp, you're obviously going to stop that lens down because that's going to increase the depth of field, or it's going to increase the depth of what's in focus. Okay. If you still are having trouble getting your head around this, I really recommend you go back. We did an episode on depth of field a long time ago, and we'll keep talking about this as we go. But I mentioned a concept last time about when you get more advanced, using that focal point to draw the viewer's attention to part of the image. And that's what I want to talk about more today for the more advanced photographers who might be watching this, or if you've gotten a good grip on it last week, this is a good thing to work towards. And we're going to go over to the computer and I want to show you some examples of some images that use this to a really nice effect. And it's really important to learn how to control that focus, particularly when you're working with really wide apertures. So if I open this, if I take the lens, open it wide up, I'm going to let a lot of light through here, but I'm going to have a very shallow depth of field. Okay, so and depending on what kind of camera you're using, how big the film or sensor is, this is going to have different effects. But sometimes you can get it stopped down to or opened up to where you just have a sliver, like a hairline of focal usability in there. And so how do you use that to draw the viewer's eye into part of the image, and why is that important? Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about autofocus on cameras, since most people now shoot digital. Even film cameras have autofocus. Some of the later ones do. And so when you're using autofocus, obviously when I'm using a medium format or a large format camera, I'm using a loop. It's slowed down, and I can really take my time to make sure I've got that focal point right, and that's part of the setup when I'm doing an image. If you're shooting event photography, if you're shooting sports photography, you don't have that time to set up and make sure you're in focus. That's why you don't see people with large format cameras shooting sports, for instance. But modern cameras, modern digital cameras, all have pretty good autofocus systems built into them. And I say pretty good, they're never going to be perfect because it's a computer. There's a computer inside your camera, and when you push that shutter button halfway down to adjust the focus, what it does is it takes a pattern of autofocus that you have selected in there, and it's going to do things like look at the light, try to judge the depth, and there's a lot of algorithms that it goes through in a split second, and it tries to make the best choice for what it wants in focus. Some people have great results with this that are used to shooting it. I think it's because I come from doing large format, doing medium format photography where I'm in control of the focus. I have a harder time leaving it in certain settings all the time. And so the one I usually prefer on my cameras is to just get a spot focus in the center of the view there. And then what I can do based on that, and I don't shoot a lot of sports photography, and this would probably be too slow for that even, but typically, especially with DX cameras, what Nikon calls them, or Canon, where you have a crop factor, it's a smaller sensor. And I wear glasses too, but I really have a trouble seeing through them because they're just tiny, even when you're looking through the viewfinder and it's magnified as much as it can. I have a real hard time getting in focus. If I try to manually focus, generally the results are bad, they're out of focus. So I do use autofocus for that. But I'll keep it on that center spot. So I'll frame up my composition, then I'll move the camera. This is not a camera, but you get it. But I'll move that. I'll determine what I want to be the focal point, what's in focus, what's perfect. I'll move it over, make sure that's in the center, grab my focus, come back out after I have the focus set, and then take the picture. That's a really good way to do that if you're doing portraits, things like that. If you're doing sports, action photography, event photography, then you're going to need to look into your other focus modes. But I think that's really important because I see a lot of people who don't understand that there are different modes of autofocus on their camera, and learning how to use them and learning why you would want to use them. Or they don't want to use the spot focus because it seems more archaic or amateur, it's not going to work. So anyway, but knowing that and paying attention to being focused on the focal point, Having said that, let's look at some images now, and I want to look at how some different photographers have used that to create interest in the photo and how that decision was made, things like that. So come on over and let's take a look.
Okay, so we're going to check out some images here to see how photographers have used focus techniques to guide one's eye, the viewer, through the image. And I got to admit, in all the research I've done for this podcast, and I generally do my homework before I record one of these, this was probably one of the more fun ones to go through. It was a little more challenging than I thought. And also, what you expect the results to be more conventional. And some of the more interesting examples is they're not conventional. I think that gives us something as photographers to look at and learn from. This first image is Edward Steichen, and this was an image taken. I think it's called Mary Learns to Walk. This is one of his famous images. Now, you've got to consider the time which he was taking pictures, which was quite a while ago, and using camera technology that is nowhere near as up to date as it is now, not only mechanically but optically also. So if you look at the lenses, and these old view cameras had such a swirling depth of field look to them. And so, being able to get that shallow focus. What's interesting is the point of focus that you get in here seems to be the most clear, kind of down here in the middle, obviously on the subject, but the subject is not quite in focus. These trees kind of are here. And I think this has an interesting effect of drawing your eye down to it, but still leaving that dreamlike, mysterious quality to the mother teaching her daughter to walk. It's simply a brilliant image, obviously, for many reasons. I'm going to keep moving here. We could spend an hour talking about each one of these, and this is obviously Henri Cartier-Bresson, the famous image of the boy with the wine bottles. And this one is a very subtle use depth of field. It's definitely more conventional. You see, this is probably done around f5.6 or something on a 35 millimeter camera. You see the boy is clearly in focus, and even these girls back here that are kind of laughing and having fun, and the women in the back are out of focus. So this is a mild use of it, but again, it draws your eye into the subject, which is in the center of the image here, being the boy walking with the wine bottles. There are about a million other things that make that image interesting that I think are more important than the depth of field, but this is a more conventional use of it to see. Moving along, this is Julia Margaret Cameron, who I haven't covered on this podcast before, and she really is an unusually interesting early photographer. Again, early lenses, early optics, large format, huge swirling depth of field. It's almost rotational, the way it hits this, this kind of hedge back here, in the shrubs. Again, the subject is in focus. It leads your eye in. This is a really interesting technique, and you see modern photographers do this sometimes by buying old lenses and shooting them wide open. It's hard to do with modern films because the emulsions are a lot faster, so you need some kind of neutral density filter to knock the light down if you're going to shoot it wide open. Julia Margaret didn't have that problem because the emulsions were so slow at the time she was shooting, and sometimes the blur you see is from motion, but this one is largely lens artifacts in here. But again, subject in focus, and it gives a dreamlike quality with this swirling, and you can see way back in the background here, it's almost completely knocked out of focus. Moving along, I have showed this example before, Ani Leibowitz. This is William S. Burroughs. This is a really good example of kind of how modern portraiture embraces this shallow depth of field. So this was done on an extremely wide lens, not wide angle, but wide aperture lens. And you can see that just basically what you want to do when you're using this technique is his eyes are perfectly in focus. And that's what the viewer feels most comfortable with, is when those eyes are in focus. So when the eyes are knocked out of focus, it has a different feel to it. You can see even Burroughs' nose is out of focus. His ears are definitely out. So it's a really shallow depth of field, drawing your attention to those eyes and giving it kind of a mysterious quality. For William S. Burroughs, this is absolutely the perfect effect. This is another interesting one. This is Alvin Coburn, and again, with the swirling in the back, early photography, the emulsions were different, shooting wide open out of necessity, but drawing, once again, your attention to the figure at the center. Moving along, these are contemporary examples, and I've showed some of Dan Winter's work before on this podcast. Dan is one of my favorite contemporary photographers. I think he is outstanding. The book that I showed when I did the podcast on him was on his commercial work, mainly his celebrity portraits. His fine art work is exceptionally good as well. And this, again, is very shallow. These were probably done on a Hasselblad, I imagine. So probably f2.8, wide open, shot late in the day, early in the morning, one of the two. Just a hand holding a jar full of stones, and you see the back is completely knocked out, so it really brings your focus, your attention to the center of the photo. Now, Dan, I got some other shots of his too that I think make an unusual kind of use of this depth of field technique. First of all, this chicken. the focal point is on the feet down here. You can see this person is holding it down. It creates a real sense of drama and mystery in here. It's not clear whether we're looking at somebody lying down with the chicken or if this is probably more likely shot from the floor up, and what's going on here. There's a real sense of mystery that's done with this out of focus blur technique here. This would probably have a lot different feel to it if it were completely in focus, shot at something like f/16, something like that. So again, really brilliant use of the technique here. And this is finally another Dan Winters portrait here, or portrait, I guess it's a portrait you could say. This has the complete opposite effect. This has something that's in the foreground that's blurred out, but it's not distracting because of the scale you see of this figure of the parent and the child down here at the waves, which is what draws your eye in. But it's interesting because of that juxtaposition of the legs that you see in the foreground that are blurred, that it just creates a fantastic effect. It's almost three-dimensional in the sense that it's out of focus in the front, but it does not distract from the image. This is such shrewd, careful placement of what the subjects are and where they are and what's in focus. This would not have worked the same had the legs been in focus. You would have knocked out the parent and the child down here. And it would have had a completely different effect. In fact, you probably wouldn't even notice them. It would have blurred the wave. So anyway, your focal point is not only them, but this wave. So you can't see the definition of the beach, the horizon line. Absolutely brilliant. Check out Dan's stuff. I really cannot say enough good things about him. He is another one of my contemporary heroes and just a brilliant photographer. His fine art work like this is a little less known simply because he appears in so many publications. But I would love to see him release a book with a lot of this stuff in it because I think it's just amazing.
Okay, so using a focal point to create interest and guide the viewer's eye through your photo, that's a really important technique. It's really hard to master, as we've kind of talked about. Sometimes there are things in your scene that don't work there, and it's really tricky because not only are you dealing with the focus, but your composition has to complement it somewhat. So anyway, I hope that's helped a little bit. That's a really good thing to get a handle on, and I highly recommend you get your camera and get out there and shoot and start practicing this kind of thing. Once again, this has been The Art of Photography, and thank you for watching.